Users of Reddit, who is an example of a real-life evil person that got what they deserved. Story 1. A killer named Tatsuya Ichihashi used plastic surgery to hide his identity while he was wanted for murdering an English teacher named Lindsay Hawker. But ironically, his plastic surgeon was the one who brought him down because he gave him before and after photos and he told the police on him. Story 2. I was waiting at a crosswalk once. The pedestrian sign told me to go. A guy making a right turn sped up to cut in front of me. I had to jump back to avoid getting hit. As the guy passed me, he pointed and laughed at me. It's really a shame that he was staring at me to mock me, because he definitely didn't see the cop waiting to exit the parking lot right next to me that he cut off. Me and the cop both made eye contact before I watched him flip on his lights and promptly pull the guy over. The cop did not look happy. I'm willing to bet that was an expensive ticket. Story 3. Maya Buzden-Slomik. She was the commandant of the women's section at Stara Gradiška, a subcamp within the Jasenovac concentration camp system built by the Ustase, an ultranationalist fascist regime installed in Croatia by Hitler and Mussolini in 1941 after the Nazis conquered Yugoslavia. She shot, stabbed, strangled, and tortured women inmates to death. After the war, she tried to hide with her husband, who had also been a camp guard at Stara Gradiška, in either Zagreb or Slovenia, but a former inmate recognized her and reported them to the Yugoslav secret police, who subsequently arrested them. The trial was fast, and so was the execution. Both her and her husband were executed by either firing squad or hanging, accounts differ. Their bodies were buried in secret locations which remain secret to this day. Story 4. Sam Bankman-Fried and his crew. Leaders of FTX and Alameda, they got stripped of their power, humiliated, and their names are forever tarnished in history. Sam got to watch in real time as all the people he used to be friends with, hang out with, and care about turn on him and point their fingers to save their own skin. He also got to watch in real time every single one of his lies becoming dismantled in court. Sam went on a number of podcasts and interviews before his trial. So it looked something like this. Prosecutor, have you ever said this or done this? Sam, I don't recall / I never said that. Prosecutor, here's video evidence of you saying that. Disgraced, humiliated, and jailed. The end of Bankman-Fried and crew. He had an interview with Tucker Carlson recently from jail, where he begged Trump for forgiveness and pleaded. He was then put into solitary confinement afterwards. Story 5. Hamza al-Bashani. He was an Egyptian army officer during the President Gamal Abdel Nasser's reign. He was very known for the brutal methods of torture and abuse he would use on the prisoners. I won't go into details. In the end, he died in a mere car accident where his body was pierced by steel bars all over, completely mutilated. There was also a rumor that spread around which stated that his skull was being used as an ashtray in a famous doctor's house. His end, and the rumors people spread about him, tell you a thing or two about how much of a terrible person he was. Story 6. Roy Cohn was a lawyer who was instrumental to McCarthyism and the Lavender Scare, then went on to become extremely rich working as a fixer for the rich and powerful. He worked for Donald Trump in the 1970s, introduced Rupert Murdoch to Ronald Reagan, and was indicted multiple times for crimes like extortion and blackmail, although nothing ever stuck. There's a very direct line from Cohn to the modern Republican Party. Roy Cohn was also a closeted homosexual, refused to ever admit it despite throwing countless other gay men under the bus, contracted AIDS in 1984, was disbarred in 1986 for trying to make a dying client sign over his estate to Cohn, and died weeks later, alone, swearing he was actually dying of liver cancer the whole time. As soon as he died, the IRS took most of his estate because of just how much money he owed them. Story 7. The dude that was recently executed by firing squad in North Carolina may have been SC, not even for the execution of the store clerk he robbed, but for the cellmate he tortured to death. Supposedly only 2 bullets hit him in the lungs and nowhere else, so he drowned in his own blood for a couple minutes. Story 8. 50 years ago at my camp, a counselor attacked a camper. Head of camp, the founder's son, was told by the boy. Consoled the boy, got up and drove away, pulled up in his pickup to the field that counselor was running an activity in. Said get in. Drove in silence for hours, deep into the main wilderness logging roads. Hours and countless miles of silence in. Head of camp tells the counselor to get out of the car. From the window, he tells the monster the boy told him everything. Then he drove away, leaving him in the dark middle of nowhere. No one ever saw or heard from the counselor again. They'll never find him. Story 9. Personal 1, but my uncle, by marriage, abandoned his wife, my maternal aunt, and kids to go gallivanting around the world with his bimbo. Not too long into it, he feels ill, and long story short, it's liver cancer that has metastasized. Bimbo leaves him. He dies alone in a foreign country. No one came to be with him in the end. And if you think it's harsh to say he deserved it for that, he also gave my Aunt Hep C, which caused her to die young and leave their kids orphaned. Story 10. I feel like I should put a warning, so here it is: warning. This post involves animal cruelty and death upon both animals and a person. I feel bad for saying this is what they deserve, but in elementary school I knew someone who lived to squeeze animals to death. And I don't mean I knew them as if we were friends, I mean I knew them as in I heard horrific stories about them. Now this person grew up going to the same schools as me, and throughout all of school, they were still obsessed with killing animals in the most horrific ways. Recently I had been wondering what happened to them, and I asked a close friend of mine, who filled me in that they had been working at a winery and gotten killed by one of the juicing machines, or whatever they are called. Quite horrific, but exactly how the animals must have felt. Story 11. The guy that attacked and killed a little girl named Katie Coleman. He was in jail when her cousin was sent there, and he carved Katie's revenge on the guy's forehead. Another piece of crap, Mel Ignatow, who photographed himself murdering a woman. He was acquitted, and then sometime after the photos were found, but nothing could be done because of double jeopardy. He died alone when he had a heart attack and fell through his coffee table. Forgot about Dr. Jeffrey McDonald. Butchered his wife and 2 daughters and found not guilty through military court. After going to talk shows, enjoying his newfound fame, new evidence was discovered and another trial, non-military, which is how they got around double jeopardy, finally nailed him, and he's in prison for life. Story 12. Years ago I was driving on THR 241, toll road in California, and it merges into State Highway 91, and I needed to take the first exit. 91 was packed, and traffic was barely moving. I turned on my signal and moved patiently through 4 lanes while waving to the nice people who let me change lanes. Sitting in a red convertible at the exit was this blonde lady who, no matter how I waved at her, would not let me exit. I lowered my passenger side window to ask her nicely, and she just yelled something to me I couldn't understand. My wife was in the passenger seat, so she started talking to the lady politely, but she would not let us cut in front of her. At that time my lane moved, and I followed up, giving up the exit. The lady was still yelling back at my wife, and she matched my movement. Except her lane didn't move. The driver in the Bentley in front of her was not happy. Story 13. My dad was a homicide detective in the 70s, and he told me about a case he had where the universe served its comeuppance. A particular perp had raped and murdered a teenage girl, and very likely others. Despite significant evidence, there was never a smoking gun, and his counsel was able to get some of the worst bits ousted to the point that the DA declined to prosecute. This went on for a few years, and the perp took to taunting the police. He had a near constant tail, and he would make comments to the cops about hypothetical crimes. He'd mention the women in the officers' lives if he knew they existed, winks, finger guns, etc. Dude was a real piece of shit. Fast forward 8 years or so, and my dad is now an attorney doing civil litigation and criminal defense. He gets a client, a semi-driver who is working through his workers' comp and insurance claims after hitting and killing a motorcyclist through no fault of his own. The perp was on the highway on his motorcycle. This bike also played a role in the murders, I believe, but I don't remember what. He lost control somehow and went right under the truck. I don't remember specifics, but the general gist was that there was very little of him that wasn't smushed. The truck driver was absolutely distraught over this, of course, and was really struggling with the fact that he killed a person. Partway through the case, the driver called my dad to tell him that something strange had been happening. He had received multiple anonymous deliveries of expensive bottles of scotch and other such things on his doorstep. Apparently, word had gotten out to the police force, and the detectives who worked on the case, along with the retired police chief, were sending the driver thank you presents for finally eliminating this monster from the planet. Story 14. My childhood bully. Throughout my kindergarten and elementary school years, there was this kid named Tyler who bullied me relentlessly. He kept getting into trouble, but not enough to actually get him to stop. Then my first elementary school closed down, and I had my last 2 years at a different school. At this new school, Tyler threatened to beat me up when we encountered each other in the bathroom. I reported what had happened to a teacher, who promptly got the principal involved. Tyler got into such deep trouble from the principal that he was pulled from regular classes and never said a word to me ever again. He eventually got expelled for some other reason that I don't know about. Last I heard from a friend of mine who was a former friend of his, he got arrested for threatening someone with a knife, never finished high school because he kept getting expelled, and is now an addict. Story 15. In high school there was this track player who regularly picked on a kid with autism. The kid/mom had spent months trying to get the school to investigate, but this dude basically had a scholarship and was basically their darling. Well, the kid with autism had an uncle who was a member of some kind white supremacist biker gang. They tracked down this track star after school, then chased him into an alley where they busted his skull open with a bike chain and had broken his knee with a baseball bat. By the time they could help him, the bikers were out of the city and on their way to another state. Since he couldn't participate in track anymore, his track scholarship was revoked. Story 16. That happened about 15 years ago. A guy notorious drinker. The type of person that beats his wife and kids disappeared one day. He was an unemployed bricklayer always drunk and looking for trouble. When he got home, he was either drinking or beating his wife or kids, to a point where they had broken bones. The wasn't very well educated and has been a housewife since she was 23 years old. So no education, no jobs on her resume, and 2 kids to take care of, so she had no chance to get away from. She was also in this kind of acceptance state where she thought that will be the only guy who would take her. Her dad, an ex-Balkan War veteran, was in a caretaking facility around 25 or 30 minutes away from where she lived with her husband. He had cancer and was at that time around 50 years old to die in peace. She never mentioned the abuse she got and always had excuses for her injuries when she visited him. One day a caretaker was talking about the drunk wife beater during his shift, and her dad instantly knew what his daughter was trying to hide. So one day he left for a walk and told the reception lady he would be back for dinner. He walked to the local pub and picked the husband up. After that, the husband was never seen again. The dad was back on time for dinner. The police got involved after he was missing for a few days but couldn't find him. They just said he ran away. The town talk, on the other hand, thinks her dad lured him away to some free drinks if he would repair an old house roof, and then killed him and buried him in the woods. But no one really knows because no one was really looking for him. Some believe he is buried near an old water well deep in the woods. She met a new guy that took care of her, and the kids. The dad passed away a couple of months ago. Story 17. Jake Patterson, a criminal in Wisconsin who kidnapped Jamie Kloss, a teenager in Barron County, Wisconsin, for 88 days from October 15, 2018 to January 10, 2019 in Gordon, up in Douglas County, Wisconsin. Jake Patterson broke into the Kloss home, shot both Jamie's parents dead in the middle of the night, and kidnapped Jamie Kloss. Patterson would hide Kloss under his bed in his cabin in Gordon, surrounded by heavy bins, and once hit Jamie Kloss really hard with a curtain rod. Jake Patterson would later be sentenced life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was also registered as a sex offender. Before the kidnapping, he saw Jamie Kloss get on her school bus, and he knew she was the girl I wanted to take. Story 18. I was pretty young and naive, and a colleague took me to this mega church, and the pastor was an engaging speaker in his 80s kid skateboarder gear and guitar music, and it seemed exciting, but he made my spidey sense tingle. It felt like such a cult of personality. He starts going on about how Judaism is a religion of laws and Christianity a religion of love, and it really bothered me. Jesus came to save us from this mean, vengeful God who won't let they eat a ham sandwich. I look it up, and that's literally his whole shtick. His book is The End of Religion on the same thesis. I write him an email that I don't think it's right of him to define his beliefs based on what he has decided others believe. My family is Jewish, and he could ask Jewish people what the law means to them. Jewish people are a tiny, persecuted majority, and claiming to speak for them about what they believe to his 5,000 followers every week is unfair, and what he was saying about them was even hateful. It was just an email, but it felt better to get it off my chest, and I never went back. Well, I get this foaming at the mouth, furious response from himself. I've delivered this message to tens of thousands of good Christians, and no one, yet except you, has had a problem, so obviously you're the problem. And he made it very clear that I was just some stupid little girl who had no business daring to address this massively holy, successful, important man of God without the due respect. I was furious but didn't have any idea what to do, so I just shelved the email. But then it came out into the public that he'd had multiple abusive and adulterous affairs with congregants and staff members of the church, and according to his wiki, he's been defrocked. 4 named pastors and additional unnamed staff have been charged with sexual misconduct, and the whole megachurch has been shut down. Story 19. Years ago, I went to a lecture by a former World War II soldier who liberated a concentration camp. One of the slides he showed was the former commander of the camp, who he described as one of the most arrogant and evil sons of bitches he'd ever met. He then mentioned that was the last known photo of the commander, as shortly after it was snapped someone took him out back behind a train, and that was the last of him. Which, to a 19-year-old kid listening to what I assumed would a fairly dry history lecture, hearing an 80-year-old man openly talk about executing particularly evil prisoner was a bit startling. He also talked about how they became so desensitized to death and violence to a degree most civilians wouldn't understand. There was a German head that had become decapitated during an artillery bombardment. They passed it every day going out on patrol, and it was sitting upright in such a way they would talk to it as they walked past. One day, one of the US soldiers decided it would be funny to kick it at another solider, who then kicked it back, and pretty soon his squad was playing soccer with a human head. It was a fascinating lecture by a man who was nearing the end of his life and gave no about being brutally honest about how ugly war is. Story 20. Rose West was almost able to get away with all of her horrific crimes, apparently getting her husband and serial killing partner to kill himself in prison so that he could take all the blame with him to the grave as she lied and practically forced the police into a plea deal for her to lie and make up a sob story about Fred being abusive towards her. Then it turned out that in a fit of jealousy, she murdered her stepdaughter from Fred's first marriage, right after taking the kid to visit Fred while he was in prison for a previous assault charge. The police could then prove she lied in her plea deal, and she's now serving multiple life sentences. And to further prove how F she was given a whole life tariff. She's expressly banned from even entertaining the notion of parole and has been ordered to die in prison. Story 21. My ex-wife made a false claim and got the SWAT team called to my house less than a week after my dad passed away in a car accident, then caught her cheating 6 months later. While moving out, she purposely left the burner phone she had been using, so I'd see all the sexting between her and the guy. Couple years after she started drinking heavily and popping pills. Ended up running over some poor dude in a bicycle he lived, and was so messed up she didn't even know she ran him over. Ended up getting 5 years in prison. Then she got out for a few years and went back in for 2 more for a parole violation, alcohol again. The smile that came across my face when I found out she was going to prison was one of the happiest moments of my life. She was that bombshell 10, and her pretty privilege didn't work for once in her life. Story 22. When I was an apprentice, a chancer parked in the training center car park, stole a laptop, expensive kit back then, and as he was leaving went the wrong way and was spotted by the 2 tutors in the workshop. They followed him outside. He drove into them, including holding on the handbrake and spinning the tires on one of the tutors, killing him. He was such a nice bloke. Always a joy to talk to. The guy who did it ran off to Ireland. He was eventually caught. But by the time he was caught, he was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair following a motorbike accident. Still got a prison sentence. Good. Story 23. I had a friend, let's call him Brian, who was part of a mutual friends group, but I was relatively new to that group and made friends with a few people, including a girl. Now Brain spread lies to the whole group, saying that I was in love with the girl, and I called her ugly, and a lot of other stuff that you shouldn't say about a woman. And the others bought they story even after Brain personally told me he just did it. A few weeks went by, and the group of friends just stopped talking to me. Last week I found out Brain had a girlfriend who left him, and now Brian is heartbroken and extremely depressed. I'd say he got what was coming for him. Story 24. Kenneth Rex McElroy, a truly deplorable human. He raped a 13-year-old repeatedly, shot her parents' dog, and burned their house down. Twice. He shot multiple people and terrorized an entire town for years. He shot a beloved local grocer in the neck. They survived to testify, and though charged was permitted bail. One day he decided to go to local bar with a rifle and a bayonet and proceeded to tell everyone what he was going to do the grocer. The townspeople had enough. While he was sitting in his truck with his wife, the 13-year-old he repeatedly attacked. He forced her to marry him at 16, so he couldn't be arrested for statutory rape. A crowd of just under 50 people gathered around and shots rang out. He was hit twice and died. Despite the multitude of witnesses, nobody, including his wife, provided any testimony as to who the shooters were. Story 25. I have an extended family member, I can't remember if he's a second cousin or cousin once removed, who was arrested for molesting children. His parents posted bail, and he fled the country to Mexico, where he had been a Mormon missionary and had contacts. He got a ton of plastic surgery, got fake documents, crossed the southern border, and moved around for a bit before ending up in a state on the Canadian border. Starts going to church again, is dating a single mom, volunteers with kids all the time. One day a kid spills some juice on his suit, and he takes it to get dry cleaned. Only he left his wallet in the suit, and the dry cleaner pulls the wallet out, and like 6 IDs come tumbling out of it. All the same guy but with different names and from different states. The dry cleaner thinks it's fishy, so he calls the police, and sure enough one ID shows up as his birth name, just from a different state. Well, one DNA test later, and he's spending the next 30 years in prison without possibility of parole, because he already fled the country. I believe he's 20 or so years into his sentence. He should be in his late 70s when he's released, if he doesn't die of health issues first. Story 26. Knew a guy in college that was infamous for inviting girls up to his dorm room and would try and have his way. Had one girl who just happened to mention he'd invited her up to his room, and we all paused and said, "Do not go up there." Explained the situation to her and her brother. Her brother suggested she invite the guy up to her room. Guy was overly excited about it, until he walked into her room and the door closed. Her brother was way protective of his sister. Guy ended up leaving college at the end of the semester because once the police showed up every girl in that dorm knew, and eventually every other dorm knew. Still none of his previous victims would speak up about it, so as far as I know the guy never suffered any consequences aside from having his jaw wired shut for the duration of his stay before leaving at the end of the semester. Story 27. This is horrible, so I won't go so far as to say she got what she deserved. I will say that she now knows what I know. And now she knows what I knew when she made a fool of herself trying to BS me. This woman at age 40 decided to use her divorce to scam me. This scam meant it turned me into unknowingly helping her friend have an affair with my husband, who I was in marriage therapy with. This marriage was on the rocks due to emotional and verbal abuse. Because of this woman, I feared for my life. This woman ended up even telling him my super secret abuse escape plan. I didn't exactly escape because he was one step ahead of my plan instead of blindsided, but I did finally divorce. I discovered the affair the month after I filed for divorce. For the next few years, my life was about making new friends. That woman and the affair woman and a couple other women were my friend group. They ended up all knowing about the affair all along. Naturally, I dropped all those friends. I made new friends. I married a new husband. My ex married, and then 18 months later, she left him because he was abusive. But that is not the revenge. Although it was nice. No, I hate the original woman, who I never would have met had she not approached me for help with her abusive divorce. Turns out my new husband was gym buddies with her ex. Turns out, he proved beyond a doubt every lie she ever told me. It was so weird, the whole thing. Anyway, a few years later, my 17-year-old son died in a car crash. The town of 1400 all came out to the funeral. The school was busing students over to the church. My ex-friend's kids were all classmates of my dead sons. Obviously, I would come face to face in the greeters line. I had funeral maids, I just made that up, but honestly, if you think like bridesmaids. My best friends, my sister, cousin, sister-in-law, they were shown photos and we had a system set up. When one of the 4 ex-friends showed up, one of my funeral maids would whisk me off to the break room and apologize on my behalf that I felt overwhelmed, and I thanked them for coming. But this person didn't take the hint. She cornered me. She bear hugged me and whispered scripture in my ear and thanked me for being her friend. I said, "Look, I forgave long ago. I am not your friend, but your daughter is like my own, and I'm very sorry for her loss. I'm not sorry to have lost you." A couple years after that, I divorced number 2, the pandemic ended my job, and I happily relocated out of the town that housed 2 ex-husband and a 200-foot pine tree with a permanent Ford Focus scar. And wouldn't you have it, that woman got an opportunity to discover exactly what a piece of crap she is. Why? Because her kid died of complications from the COVID vaccine. Age 19, not the friend of my dead son, but the younger sister. She too would have to stand in line for 1,400 people shuffling through repeating rumors because they don't really know you well enough to realize it's bullshit. She too would get the fake hug from fake friends. And because of the friendships and marriages she destroyed, she too will get messages forced upon her at her most vulnerable time of her life by people who once did everything to take everything away from you. Yeah, that is not revenge. That was a life lesson learned too late. Unfortunately, her daughter died. It's sad, probably because the daughter's death will now be fuel for the wicked woman's next scam. I heard her new old man put her on the street recently. Such a shame. Story 28. Not exactly a person, but my old school. I had to leave after my Latin teacher's car hit me at 80 km/h. I got into a new class because I missed half a year due to hospital and rehab, and I was bullied in that new class. I don't remember much because my conscience oppressed my memories of that place, but I know it did end with me having to go to the ER several times, and instead of helping, the principal blamed me for what had happened, victimized Mrs. Link, the Latin teacher who literally ended my life. I can't even remember my childhood due to the injuries and post-traumatic responses of my brain. So whenever I talk about my pre-car crash life, I usually refer to it as my former life or my other life. Once I referred to it as my first life, but a few people at the table didn't know my story and thought I was a wacko who believes she remembers her past lives, and basically participated in the bullying by giving me a tattle because I dared answer questions when people asked me about why I was on crutches and outside of school in a wheelchair, and apparently that is slander and insulting against Mrs. Link. I basically just quoted my diary. I have no recollection of any of that. I don't even remember what they looked like or anything. Either way, that school was a horrible place where horrible things happened. My brother is no bit less troubled than I was, and voila, parts of it burned down 2 weeks ago. I swear it wasn't me. I have an alibi. I did, however, see photos and they haunted my mind, so going against my psychiatrist's former ban from going there, it's been almost 11 or 12 years since that advice. I want to look at it in well, it's not exactly memories that came up, but something in me remembered the place. I think I know a couple of things in the yard that have changed since I left there. Effie, the new principal they've had for about 4 years, now had the outer walls painted over, so all the pictures and graffiti the art students were allowed to do are gone. I still have some old photos of them, and it is rather sad they are gone. They were really pretty. Anywho, if I recall correctly, I think the place where the fire started was where I used to stand with a couple of girls a couple of grades above me. We met there between the lessons. Except for lunch break, every student who has lessons in the afternoon either goes home or into town to eat, but that's the general principle in our town's schools.